So basically, all the patients were getting the same medication. And he says...
Do you know what medication that was?
No, we don't. And
each pill for each patient from each box.
not for each patient, because he says it was a matter of the patients who could walk themselves to where the nurses were would get the medication.
If they also had disabled patients, you mean on wheel who couldn't move, who were not mobile?
I think because of, like with my mom's condition, they'd said she'd also lose ability of her legs. So when he found her, she couldn't walk. So patients like that who weren't mobile, who weren't able to talk, were not, if you can't speak for yourself or get yourself to that place, you would not get the medication.
What place are you talking about?
At Takalani. If you cannot get to the station where the nurses were standing.
To the station where the medicines were dispensed.
Because even with the food, he says they were all just put on one table. So the patients who could walk to the plate would have to go get a plate. So he had to go get a plate to come feed my mom.
Did he say how many people he thought were there?
Around 100. He says there were around 100.
100 patients at Takalani, is that right?
And that was including the live patients and those patients who had been there prior.
And did he observe her sleeping quarters?
After the meds, he says they gave them the meds first at around 12, and they ate later on around 4. That's when they got food. And after that, he refused to leave without seeing where she was going to sleep. So when they moved them into the ward where they were all sleeping, there were a few beds, but those beds had pictures on top of them and these are the beds of the patients who had been there before, and you could see that these are the pictures of their loved ones. And around the ward, there were benches going around the entire ward. So the patients from Esidimeni would sleep on the benches. So they would all just sit upright on the benches, and those who couldn't find space on the bench would sleep on the floor.
Were there mattresses on the floor?
No. And those who were there prior would then go to their beds. But because he refused to leave, they took my mom to a bed, but he could see that it was not her bed because it had the other patient's pictures on the wall.
Where was that patient?
He doesn't know.
Were there blankets?
No. So you would sit on the chair and sleep how you were dressed. Or if you didn't make it to the bench in time, then you would sleep on the floor with what you were dressed in. The only people that had blankets were the patients that had beds.
And were there bathroom facilities?
He didn't see the bathroom facilities. But you could tell that she hadn't bathed in a while.
How could you tell?
From the smell and from the clothing. The clothing looked very dirty, and it was the same outfit that she had been moved in. And even when my sister went there the next, how often are we allowed to visit? Very much. She loved dressing up. She took care of herself very well. Always made sure that she presented herself properly. She really did.
Can you tell us who called you to inform you that your mother had passed away?
We were called by a lady called, Mahwadi Christina from Takalani. She's the head nurse from Takalani. And they called my brother. She said that she tried to contact my sister, but they had entered her information incorrectly on the system. So that's why they couldn't get a hold of her. So they called my brother, and they say that she had passed away the night before. They told us that she had passed away the night before, and she passed away at Jabulani Hospital. We were not told that she had been moved to a hospital. And the reason they said for not calling us, because she passed away, they said around 9 o'clock on the 5th.
On the
5th of June, 2016.
not 6th.
No. Oh, she passed away on the 6th. Sorry, they let us know on the 7th.
Yes.
So they said that the reason why they couldn't call us on the 6th was because the head nurse who had admitted her wasn't there. She had already knocked off at 6, so they can't make any calls for any patients that she admitted. So they had to wait until the next day when she came back in before they could call family members. That was the reason we were told. Why we were only told the next day.
And what happened? How did your mother die?
They, on the B16, because when we got there, the B16 had been filled out, her death certificate had been fetched. We didn't even go to the hospital. We went to Takalani to meet with the manager of Takalani, and when we got there, he said that we'd have to wait for Miss Christina because
What was the name of the manager of Takalani?
Michael.
Michael.
And he said that we'd have to wait for the manager for the head nurse, Christina. And we were there for most of the day, and they kept saying they can't.
What was the date? What was the date on which you were there?
The 7th.
The 7th. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we were there for most of the day, and they said they can't reach her. She's at the police station. She's at Deep Cliff Police Station. And then we went to...
So you had travelled back.
We had gone
That was the day you were writing an exam?
Yes. So I had to go back home. I didn't go write my paper. I had to go back home.
Okay. So you were there at Takalani on the 7th?
On the 7th, it was my sister, my brother, and my dad. Because when I got there, they'd already left. So they got to Soweto around 12 o'clock, and they waited, and they said this lady was at the Deep Cliff Police Station. They went to the police station. When they got there, they called her, and she said she's already left. She's back at Takalani. They went back to Takalani, and she wasn't there. She only got there around 4. And then at 4, she took them to, when she finally got there, she took them to the funeral parlor. She had already been moved from the hospital to a funeral parlor.
Without your consent, the consent
Yes.
of the family?
Yes.
Which
Even with
funeral
the
parlour?
Fusana funeral parlor in Deep Cliff. Even with the B16 forms, they already filled out for us by this lady. The death certificate.
What are B16 forms?
B16 forms are the forms indicating place of death, cause of death. Yes.
And what was written as a cause of death?
The cause of death was cardiac arrest and epileptic fits, but my mom has never been epileptic. She's never had epilepsy. And when I went for my interviews with the ombudsman, he says that someone who does not understand vascular dementia would take a mild stroke, which they get when they're not on proper medication, as an epileptic fit. So it's a sign of not being on proper medication, and that's why they thought that she had been having epileptic fits throughout the week, when it was actually her having mild strokes as a sign of not being on the right medication, and her condition therefore deteriorating.
Did you spoke about the funeral parlor?
When they got to the funeral parlor, they were told to wait again, because they said they had to prepare the body before they could allow them to see it. So that was another hour wait, and then they were finally allowed to see and identify her.
Who paid for the costs of the undertaker and the funeral service?
We did.
You did. And what was the cost?
I'm not sure of the exact amount, but we paid from we paid all of the funeral expenses. So we were finally allowed to go. They were finally allowed to go in and identify her, and that's when the funeral proceedings started.
Who identified her?
My brother, my sister, and my father. They went in to go identify her because we wanted to make sure that it was her. Because if when they first went to go there to visit, they couldn't identify her, how were we to be sure that it was her who had passed away? So after that, they went back to Takalani, and Christina lady pulled out my mother's file so that she could give us her ID documents and the death certificate.
Just to clarify, you say that your mother was taken to which hospital?
They say Jabulani Hospital. We've never been to the hospital. We've never received a call from the hospital.
So there was no one with your mother at the hospital from the family?
No. We weren't informed when she was moved to the hospital, and when we were already informed of her passing, they said they had already moved her to a funeral parlor. So we've never been to the hospital. We don't know which. We just know that she was at Jabulani Hospital. That's the name we were given. So we've never been to the hospital. We've never met any nurse from the hospital. So from Takalani, we were taken directly to the funeral parlor.
And you say you are one of 4 siblings. Mm-hmm. And what has the impact of this been on you and your family?
It's been very hard because for us, she was our mother, We've all grown up having a normal, loving mother who was there at school award night, who was there to make your school lunch in the morning, who took me to my first day at varsity, who was with me on my first day going to varsity, who helped me move, helped me pack, We all had, she was our mother. So at a point where we were just starting to accept that she was not the woman that we know, that we're used to, we lost her. And at a point where we were just starting to accept her loss, we then found out of the way in which she died. Because for us, we just thought it was the cardiac arrest that we had been told of. So February this year, at the Ombudsman's press release, finding out that our mother had been starved and dehydrated to death.
How did you find that out?
At the press release. At the Ombudsman's press release. Beginning February this year, 2017. So having to find that out was very hard.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. When your brother visited your mother at Takalani, he could barely recognize her, you said. Did you, as a family, consider taking her out?
We did. We asked if we could remove her. At first, the reason why we even considered putting her into the public system was when we first started noticing that she was getting sick. We noticed she was very paranoid. She would hallucinate. So when we first noticed that, and we took her to Vista in Centurion, it's a depression clinic. So we just thought she'd have to go through psychology, get vitamin B12, and she'd be back home. And when the doctor told us, the psychiatrist called us in for a family meeting and explained to us that after all the tests that she's run, she can conclude that my mom has vascular dementia. And with that, she explained that she would have to be in the public system because they give the best long-term mental health care. So she advised us that we take her we move her from Vista and we admit her into the public system because they give the best long-term mental health care, and they would take better care of her than being at a private hospital, because at private clinics, they only deal with your depression and your anxiety. They don't deal with such cases. They don't have the resources and the skills to deal with such cases. So that's when we took her to Charlotte Matleka here. And from there, she was moved to Tara, and from Tara, she was moved to Life Esidimeni. And we were told that we would never be able to take care of her on our own. All the social workers at each institution, at Vista, at Charlotte, at Tara, all told us that we would not be able to take care of her because someone with vascular dementia needs to be taking the correct medication at all times. And when her condition changes, so does her medication. So we would not be able to identify when she would need a change of medication. So we would, and she also said that it would also be emotionally draining to have her in the house. So they all did not recommend us taking care of her because they said we're all too young and we would not mentally be able to cope with having her in the house emotionally as well. So that is why we went into this thinking this was the best. This was the best option we had, because at all the different institutions we took her to, they said, this is the best. This is the best kind of care for this condition. And we were told we still have a long time with her, you know. So even hearing that, even though she's not in our lives anymore, you continue to make plans with her in mind. I mean, we'd go visit and we'd talk about my graduation and she's going to be there, and, you know. So it was very hard, and it's been very hard because this was someone we still thought we'd have in our lives for a long time to come. So just as we were starting to deal with the fact that she's not the mother we used to, we lost her. And we lost her with thinking that this was the best place she could be and we still have time. So it's been very hard to accept, and it's been very hard to move on. It's taken a physical toll on all of us, an emotional toll on all of us.
And how's your father coping?
Not too well as well. He's actually in Limpopo now, but he also recently almost had a stroke. So I also almost had a stroke, and I'm on muscle relaxants as well. So it's taken a very physical and emotional toll on all of us.
How old are you?
I'm 24.
You say it's had a physical toll on you. You've seen a doctor.
Soon after the funeral, I think we buried her on a Friday. On a Tuesday night, I couldn't sleep. I had these sharp pains running up and down my entire left side, and I couldn't sleep. And in the morning, I went to the doctor, and he said I was having a panic attack so extreme that I almost had a stroke, hence the sharp pains. And they had to run tests to check that it hadn't affected my heart and anything else, and that's why they put me on the muscle relaxants and on the sleeping tablets as well. I haven't been able to sleep because when we went to go view her body, because of the strokes that she had, her face had collapsed on the one side. So I wasn't aware of this. So when we went to go view her body, when I saw it, I literally ran out. because it is that bad. She had lost so much weight, and the collapse of her face, it looked that scary that I literally ran out. So I've been having, nightmares, and ever since then.
And your siblings?
The same. After the funeral, they all had to go to doctors. We're all on different kinds of medication.
All of your siblings?
All of us. My brother was also put on the same medication as ours, and my sister, they said that the stress, because they said her stress area is her shoulders, was so much that it was starting to bend her spine. So she's on medication, and she has to be on physio. So it's been very hard on us. It's been extremely hard on us, and we came into this entire process thinking we would gain healing, thinking we would get answers that would make us understand and would make things clearer for us, and we haven't.
But you know now, from the Ombud reports that you referred to, that Takalani was not licensed when your mother was there. That there had been no preparations in the proper selection of patients which were to be placed at Takalani. The report tells us that there were no proper medical records that would facilitate prescription and medication of patients. And we know from the report that Takalani was hopelessly overcrowded. And that in fact it was a death trap.
In terms of the files, when we went there, when my siblings went there after her passing, Christina, when she gave them the death certificates, she had my mother's file. And it was her file from Charlotte, from when she first got admitted.
From Charlotte Matlaki Hospital,
yes,
right?
Because the file travels with the patient as they move. And the file even had her picture on it. So they had her entire medical records from the beginning.
That included the life acid-demanding ones?
Yes.
Yes.
So in terms of her medical records, they had everything. Because even in terms of contacts, they said that's how they found us, because our contacts were on her file.
So you're really saying, had they been trained and had they been diligent, they had the means to know on what medication your mother was
on. They had the means to know what she had, what medication she was on. And if they were properly trained, then they would have noticed what the different changes meant for her condition. And it could have been prevented if it was someone who had the relevant background.
The state tells us that they concede, they agree that their wrongful and unlawful and negligent conduct costs the death of your mother. What does that do for you? Does it help anyway?
It doesn't. I say it doesn't help because they agree, but the way in which they've treated the families afterwards, it's almost as if they've agreed to save face, but they still don't realize or haven't fathomed the amount of damage and hurt that they've caused. Because we went to a prayer session in December last year held by the Premier
Where was that?
at a church here in town, in Joburg. And one of the ministers, who was the MC, said, "We are here today because you chose to throw your people away. Had you not had you not thrown your people away,"
Who is
and
you?
it's-
He was,
he's referring to the families. "Had you not thrown your people away, then the government wouldn't have had to take care of them and they wouldn't have died." So it's almost as if they have this perception that because these people were mentally ill, they didn't have families who cared for them. We cared for these people. These are our people. We cared for them. We did as much as we could. We went over and beyond in terms of going to visit, in terms of anything that they wanted. At Tara, when she was at Tara, they'd always call if they were short of anything. And we would go buy and bring. Whatever they needed, we would provide. Whatever they were short of, we would help. So for them, it's almost as if because they were in these institutions, their families didn't care about them. So why should we? Why are they making a big deal of these deaths because they had thrown their people away?
Do you remember the name of the minister you're talking about?
I don't remember the name, but he was the MC of the event.
Was it a male that
Yes.
was MC?
And they had another healing session as well this year in Pretoria. And the MC again
was it
said,
the same MC?
No, it was a different one. And she said, people die all the time, so why are you crying? We understand that people die all the time. Our problem is the manner in which they died in. These people were sent to their deaths. And they died in the most painful way possible. They were tortured to a point of death.
At the prayer meetings, did anybody from the stage tell you why they sent your families to a place like Takalani, which on all accounts, if you look at the Ombuds report, Takalani is amongst the 5 worst places that you could have been sent to. In other words, death was almost assured at Takalani.
It was inevitable.
Yeah. Did any one of these officials at these prayer sessions tell you why they made this decision to move your family members in this way?
We've never been told justice. We've never been told why this decision was made. We've never been told why those people were kept there for so long. Even when people first started dying, no changes were being made. We've never had any explanations, and that's what I'm saying. For me personally, I came into this entire process hoping to get answers, thinking we would get answers, so that we can start to heal, so that we can start to comprehend all that happened. And we haven't. Because following the arbitration, everyone who's been called in, who's supposed to have some sort of answer, don't want to take responsibility. And it's all, I don't know, I don't know. Nobody wants to be held liable for the damage which they caused.
Who do you think is responsible?
I think there were quite a few people who were responsible. And I think everyone now is using Qedani as a scapegoat because she's not here to answer for herself.
Kani Masango is the MEC
Of health, yes.
of health.
Was the.
Was the MEC of health, okay.
And I think they're all using.
Remember, many other people are going to read this record.
Oh, yes, sorry.
So they should be able to identify who we're talking about. Okay.
And they're all using her as a scapegoat because she's not here to answer for herself, but she's not the only one at fault. Yes, she might have called this entire thing into action, but as a person, you have a moral obligation to say no. As a manager at the NGO, as the nurses at an NGO, when you go a day without having fed these patients, when you are dressed in your warm clothes and these patients are there without clothes, aren't getting food, aren't getting the right medication, you have the moral obligation to call these people out. You can't just sit back and watch and then say, well, I was told to do so. A gun wasn't held to your head. You, at a certain point, could have said, but this is wrong, let's change it. But this is wrong, let's get help. When families came in to visit, you could have said, we're not coping. Bring this, help us with this.
There was more than a moral obligation, certainly on the government.
Because they've taken oaths.
And because we have a constitution. We have gone through, you talk about our people as your families, your people, but they are all of our people. And they are specifically in the care of the government. And the government has constitutional obligations with regard to not just how they govern, but how they treat people of this country, our people.
Yeah, and they've let them down and they continue to let us down with the manner in which they treat us as families, because there's still a complete disregard for the families.
You mean even now?
Yes. Even attending any government-related event, I dread going to any government-related event, because there's bound to be one person who's going to throw an insult, who's going to make it seem as though we didn't care, or, you know, why is it such a big thing? Why are you crying? You know, and even when we're there, the events are very condescending. They're very condescending in the terms that it's all very, you know, oh, we made a mistake, let's hold hands, kumbaya, you know, and I say it's almost as if we are the stars of the show, because you get to an event and they sell you this whole forgive.
What event would that be?
The healing sessions that they've been having.
Who typically would preside at the healing sessions?
They usually have different MCs at each event.
And which state officials would come out to the events?
They come, different state officials that come at each event. The one person who has been to all of them, who has been consistent, is David Makura. He's been
the
Premier of Gauteng. Mm-hmm. He's been consistent, but at each event there's always a different state official. And there's always this part where they say, okay, well, this person wasn't here the last time. Come tell them why you're crying. You know, like the families have to come and now justify. And hence I say we're the stars of the show, because it's like we're the acts, and we must now come and parade our pain. And even after that, they still don't get it.
Yeah, I do get the point, and I do get your concern and your that pain. It must be said, though, isn't it so, that the response of government here is different from many other instances where death had ensued as a result of the conduct of the state, isn't it?
That I definitely agree to. It has been, in terms
has
of
been
that they've taken full responsibility.
Yes.
It has been.
Yeah, sure.
But
and we must give them that credit, because think about similar proceedings, but in relation to Marikana, you remember? You remember the state officials were on their hind legs and fighting back that they had done nothing wrong, you remember?
I do, Justice.
And here we have a situation where, in all fairness, to the Premier and the National Minister, they've come out to say their officials, public servants, were wrong and expressed preparedness to find redress for the families. So there is a difference in positioning, isn't it?
There is, Justice. I think for us, it's just there needs to be a sincerity with all of that. There needs to be a level of sympathy. There's no point in me saying, I'm sorry I've wronged you, but coming back again and sort of mocking you for your pain.
Shall I tell you a little light story?
Yes, Justice.
You're young enough for me to tell you a bedtime story. When I was young, and you might find it in a little book I've written doing the rounds here, there was a bully in my neighborhood. And he would beat you up. And then he finds reason to say sorry. Then he says to me, I'm sorry. And I'm still crying. He says, I'm sorry. And I go, he says, hey, I said I'm sorry. Which, and if I persist, he says, I'm going to beat you up again. You must accept my apology. Okay, so you find regular township bullies who want to beat you up, compel you to accept even their apology. You see what I mean? And I hope we're not there, where we are compelled to. I said, I'm sorry, did you hear me? So, you are right, apologies ought to be compassionate, ought to be honest, ought to be caring. And you can't browbeat people into submission to accept your apology. You must hope that they might, at best. So you've got a point here. And the other side of the scale, of course, we have a contrite state here. We have a state that is remorseful, that acknowledges the wrong. And it's a little step better than the past.
It is.
If you're young enough, I can tell you about Sharpeville. It was short, they died, they lay there. Nobody has said sorry up to now. So we are in a little different zone now. And I hope it will add a little bit to the healing. Else, I'm inviting you to respond if you feel like, but there's a little bedtime story I told you. Okay.
It is. I definitely feel that there has been an effort that has been made. I definitely can't deny that, and we do appreciate those efforts. But as I was saying, it needs to come with a level of honesty, as you said. Don't do it just for the sake of it has to be done, but do it because you genuinely want to do it. You genuinely want to do right and make right.
Ms. Manyena, sorry, Justice.
Oh, please go ahead.
Is an apology sufficient? I understand what Justice Masaneke has been putting to you, and this is a different process to past painful experiences in this country before 94 and after. I would like to know whether you believe that an apology is sufficient, even if it's sincere. What would you want? Other than that, what would you want to hear or see from our government democratically elected, other than an apology?
An apology on its own would not be enough. Because as we're saying, it's not good enough to just say sorry and then come bully me again later on. There needs to be certain steps, and I can again give them credit for that, with making sure that those patients who were still in those remaining NGOs have been moved. But as well now, to not just apologize to the families, as I've said, but make right with all the pain and trauma that they've now had to endure because of this. So a sincere apology is necessary, yes. A sincere apology from the relevant people. But as well, you need to make right by the families for all the hurt and trauma that they've had to endure, the physical and emotional and mental pain that they've had to endure because of this entire process.
Including, no doubt, compensation. It's an acknowledgement that wrong has been committed, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes, there are softer emotional issues. I call them softer, I'm wrong. There are other issues, but there's also place for money as a compensation, as acknowledgement that wrong has occurred, isn't it?
It is necessary, and I think that's one of my biggest fears is I hope, but because of past interactions, I'm scared they might let us down again. As I'm saying with the past,
Who are they?
the government, as with the past healing sessions that we've been to, where we came in as families with the hope that things would be different, we'd get treated differently, and we're let down. So I hope that this process will be different from the previous treatment that we've received as families. And because this is basically the final process, and as families, we'll never get another opportunity to be done right by. So I hope that they take this with the seriousness that it carries, and it will follow through.
Well, of course, you should also hope that the Public Service Commission, or those who are in charge of that, would want to see that the appropriate steps are taken to hold those who are responsible to account, isn't it?
Yes.
Over and above what the arbitration is doing, isn't it so?
The families want that by all means. We'd like to see criminal cases being pursued. And hopefully that will further highlight the seriousness of this entire matter so that it doesn't happen again. So we don't find ourselves 10 years down the line in a similar position. So we don't find ourselves this happening again, because I think we need to get to a point where we realize that mental health, especially in the current age that I'm in, is very rife. Depression starts from now an earlier age. So we need to start taking mental health extremely seriously. And just because someone has a mental condition, it does not make them less of a human. It does not make them any less deserving of treatment or of care. So we as a people, I feel, need to get to that point where just because you have a mental health condition, it doesn't make you less human. And I hope that that's what, as a country, we can take from this, that people with mental health are people, and they're as deserving of rights as any other one of us. They're as deserving of proper health care as any other one of us. Just because they can't speak up for themselves or can't defend themselves doesn't mean they don't deserve or need it, and doesn't make them any less human.
Ms. Manyana, I know how afraid you were and scared you were of this process. You've been very brave to come and speak here on behalf of the family. Is there anything else you would like to say? You don't have to, I'm just inviting you if there is.
No, I think I've shared all that, you know, I wanted to share, and yeah, I'm glad that this process is taking place, and like I said, I hope that we will start getting taken seriously as the families who have lost their loved ones, because these weren't patients. You know, this is not just the 7th person who passed away. These are our loved ones. This is my mother. This is someone who raised me, who's taken care of me. You know, I haven't lost a patient. I haven't lost a number. I've lost a mother.
Thank you, Ms. Manyana. I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Let's get crowds.
That are still alive, that survive this process. I've said it before in this hearing that there was a similar process in the Eastern Cape with the frail care patients going. Luckily, those people didn't die because the court stopped it. But the one theme that was also recurring is the one that you've now picked up on, about you dumping your family. That was actually the political head of the Department of Social Development actually had a press statement to that effect in the Eastern Cape saying, you are rich people, this is not Ubuntu in our culture, we care for our frail people. How do you feel about, firstly, as a family, when something like that is said?
It's hurtful. It's hurtful because we know the lengths that we went for our mother. You know, she would go to any lengths for us. She always went out of her way to make sure that we had what we need, what we wanted. And we made sure that at a time where she needed us, we did exactly what she would have done for us. So it's angering to a certain point that someone who doesn't even know the situation or understand what we've been through as families can come and say that.
And secondly, from our perspective, could you assist us perhaps in how can we make sure that this type of political statements aren't put out there? Have you got an answer perhaps to assist us?
I don't, because it's very hard to control what someone else says. And the reason why such statements are still being said is because, like I said, these people aren't seen as people. So it's almost as if, why would a family care about a mental health patient? Obviously they're throwing them away, you know. It's about changing how, as I said, we as people see people with mental conditions. The moment that we realize that these are people just as you and I are people, then such statements will change. Because there's no way that I'm sure your family would throw you away. So why would it be any different if you have a mental health condition?
Or perhaps when we equate money instead of seeing a vulnerable person. Don't you agree?
Exactly. It's as because maybe they weren't bringing any economical value, therefore they don't have value.
And as a society, we should be caring for the vulnerable more than we have done up to now. Do you agree?
I agree with that.
Thank you, Justice Museneke.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justice. Ma'am, I only have one question for you. Have you been called to testify at the tribunal in respect of the Ombudsman's findings of Takalani?
No, we haven't.
Not. Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Has she been called to what?
To testify at the tribunal, Justice, to provide their evidence as to what they found there.
At the tribunal? Or you mean during the investigation of the Ombud?
No. The tribunal that's now been conducted in respect of the Ombudsman's report by Takalani.
I see.
No,
I'm
we,
sorry,
we
no.
haven't. No, we haven't.
Counsel,
No questions, Justice.
no questions.
Seneca.
Counsel for the state.
Thank you, Justice. There are no questions to the witness, but through you, Justice, if we can just be allowed to make some submissions from what we have heard. Firstly, Ms. Magena, we do regret the passing of your mother. As government, we understand fully well how hard it is for one to lose a mother and a wife. And you have made mention of the fact that there are statements made by...
Well, the submissions at this stage must be propositions to the witness, and if you stop in between so that she can respond, isn't it? With examination stage. So the proposition you put, she might say, I agree, I don't agree. She's entitled to respond at this stage. Distinct from your submissions at the end, isn't it?
Justice, we just want to acknowledge the loss of a parent.
Yes, without inviting the witness to comment.
From the government side, indeed.
Yes.
Yes. What we want to assure the witness, other family members, and the nation is that we take this tragedy very serious, and the government is willing to take measures to ensure that there is no repeat to this situation. And with regard to the fear that you have about being let down, the government has engaged itself, committed itself to engage through this process, which we are in now, in order to assist everyone else who has been affected by the tragedy. We are sincerely sorry about the event, the loss of your mother, and will take measures to help you, your family, to deal with the situation. And thank you for making the time to give an account of your story.
Thank you. You're entitled to respond.
No, thank you for that. We appreciate it.
The one thing I struggle with still is that parts of equitable redress that might assume the form of counseling, psychological or psychiatric intervention. What do you want to say about that? The arbitration agreement anticipates that as part of redress. Is there anything you want to say about that?
At the events, at the different healing sessions that they have had social workers from social development there. And at each event, we were told that the social workers had been given our contact details and that they're supposed to follow through. We were supposed to have already been receiving counseling, but we've never received calls from any of those social workers. In fact, the most recent session we had was with the psychiatrist that Section 27 had organized for us. But in terms of anyone from the government, we haven't received any sort of communication.
So counseling was promised, but it was not forthcoming.
Yes. Because we were told that each family had been allocated to a social worker and that the social worker was supposed to communicate with us and start sessions, but we haven't received any communication.
Should I be, in the end, ordering that counseling ought to be made mandatory? Counseling funded by the state ought to be made compulsory?
I think so. I think from hearing the different stories of what the other families have been through and from my personal experience as well, I feel that counseling is necessary because this entire situation, if I can call it that, has left us very scarred and has left us very traumatized. And counseling is needed for the families because otherwise it will just filter down and now, further stress the families.
Well, it's your final moment. Is there anything else you want to say before we relieve you from the stand?
No, there isn't.
No,
there isn't justice.
You've had your day in court, as they often say. But it was a moment also, it's a very important moment to allow you to grieve and to say it. I've often with great pride talked about some of the traditional practices around death. Mm-hmm. You know how it goes. You go to your family, mm-hmm. and they repeat to everyone who comes to mourn how it happened. And you know that healing impact. He was alive and well, doing well. He went to work. He had a pain on the side of his head. And our people would repeat it to almost everybody who comes to mourn. And the beneficial effect of it on the grieving family member is obvious, isn't it? The more you say, the more accepting, the more you look into the mirror and confront the pain. So it was a little session like that here, and thanks for coming out and sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you. Would like to thank you as well as a family for agreeing to head this entire process, and we're very thankful that some sort of effort is being made to ensure that families get answers and get the justice they deserve. So we are very appreciative.
Okay. Moredi amangen. Sipela gabotse.
Ke a leboga.